it's an accidental career from the start.
Yeah.
So therefore, everything is a bonus. I don't think you could approach one of my leadership team who's worked with me more than once who doesn't have a range of my mother's sayings. But I think my curiosity it really started to flourish year 8, maths teacher.
What were the biggest challenges you were kind of through those first 20 years or so of kind of building your career?
Finding my voice. Not everything is as critically urgent as it is in a project context, because somehow we instinctively measure what a project costs, but we don't necessarily with the same diligence measure what we burn in a day in operations. Like even today, when I'm interviewing, I will ask our front desk person and my EA, what were they like?
Yeah.
How do they interact with you?
Today we are pleased to welcome Ayten Ozenc, the current CIO at ABN Group. Ayten brings a wealth of global experience and a successful track record from roles at Tabcorp, Toll Group and OPOS. As a strategic and principled leader, Ayten is dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion within organisations. With a strong passion for leveraging technology to drive organisational growth and innovation, Ayten also serves as a director at Women in STEM, championing a diverse and inclusive future. Join our conversation as we explore how her curiosity has led Ayten through an accidental but incredible career journey. So Ayten, thank you for joining me today. You've had a fabulous career and you've worked for some absolutely incredible organisations, some more than once. And you've also been very actively involved in shaping technology through your work at Vic ICT for Women. So really keen to learn about your journey today and kind of everything and what's kind of happened and where you managed to get through. But I love to start at the beginning. So through all my research, I kind of couldn't really figure out where home was from you. So are you originally from Melbourne?
No. Thank you so much for having me, firstly.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's absolutely lovely to be here and have this discussion with you. Home is Turkey.
Right.
So I was born in Turkey and my family emigrated to Australia when I was 5.
Yeah, wow, okay. Do you have any memories of Turkey?
I do, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
I have memories and we've travelled back home often and we still do. We're actually got a very large family holiday booked. We're all flying out. There's 27 of us heading back home to Turkey on the 23rd of July. So we've got a big family trip. My siblings and I all live here in Melbourne, so we're all travelling back home together. My parents normally are here half the year, so we're going back to visit them.
Yeah, fantastic. I actually did see on your LinkedIn profile, it said fluent in Turkish.
That's it.
And I thought that's, so I assumed the connection from your name. But yeah, didn't realise you were born there. Would you say that is kind of influenced, that upbringing and kind of cultural aspect has influenced who you are today?
Oh, massively so. Absolutely.
Yeah, in what ways?
I actually, knowing that who you are and your values are set at such an early age, such a young age, I think that my values, my work ethic are deeply, deeply anchored into my heritage, into my family, my grandparents, my parents. So I draw very deeply from that connection. And it's influenced me and continues to influence me today.
Yeah, right. And do you think that kind of permeates into the way that you run your teams and your kind of leadership style as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It does. I don't think you could approach one of my leadership team who's worked with me more than once who doesn't have a range of my mother's sayings that translate really poorly but that delivers the message. And they, amongst themselves, have their favourites of Ayten's mum's sayings, which there's usually a story behind it and they may not translate well, but the message that they convey is pertinent to the time, at least in my opinion. But they all have a story of a collection of my mother's sayings. So
that's like Ayten's mum's sayings bingo.
Pretty much. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, but that's lovely, isn't it? Because I think we are the product of where we came from and who we are, and I think it's important to bring that version of ourselves to work and not have these different identities. I think that authenticity is important, particularly as a leader.
Oh, absolutely. And it's such hard work to try and be anything other than who you are.
Yes, and
It
you're
really
absolutely right.
is.
And it becomes very de-energizing,
Yes.
I think. And I've seen that through my career in people when they first step into management or leadership roles, and they feel like they've suddenly got to become more professional or sort of act a bit different because they've taken that responsibility. And you kind of see that fatigue kicking quite quick.
Indeed.
Because ironically, someone's got to that position because of who they were and where
Exactly.
they came from. So don't change now.
Too late.
That was not really the point. We asked you to be promoted and be something different. So your resume and your LinkedIn picks up the story of your life in sort of late 80s. So what I was interested in is, as you were coming out of high school, what were you thinking about as your career?
Well, IT as it exists today didn't really exist. So the context was really different.
Yeah.
I was curious, and I think my curiosity it really started to flourish year 8, maths teacher. And it's quite funny how I will come back to my year 8 maths teacher later in our discussion if you would like, how life has a way of just coming full circle. But he instilled in me this need for solving problems, or the curiosity that comes with solving problems. Everything was a maths equation. So I was a child. I grew up in inner city Melbourne, grew up in North Melbourne, went to university, high school, and I was different. If I go back even earlier, moving to Australia, coming to Australia and not speaking a word of English as a child. So all of the challenges that presented kind of still weigh reasonably heavily, and I still remember what it feels like, what it felt like. So that carried with me throughout school, and coming from a Turkish family where family is everything, and we don't necessarily, most Turkish kids back then didn't go on school camps, didn't do a whole bunch of things that other families and other kids saw as a vehicle for their kids learning and growing. We're very different, or were very different. Yep. It's quite funny how, again, life has come full circle, and we're probably one of the most integrated families with a multitude of nationalities in amongst the family today, but back then. So at school, I was a bit of a loner. I had a couple of friends, but maths was my friend. Like my maths teacher was my friend. It makes me sound sad. I wasn't. I had a very happy childhood, but I was curious. So the genesis of my curiosity in problem solving, and I probably see myself more as a problem solver than a technologist these days. Yeah. As if you were to go and talk to my team today, they probably wouldn't let me anywhere near technology other than tools to work with. So it started there.
Today you're solving different problems.
Different problems.
Right.
So that's what I do. I solve problems. But so from there I studied technology, so computer science, then some business training, then started my career in BHP. Yeah. I cannot believe where the years have gone. Sometimes I tell people, I've been in IT for 25 years, and they're like, no, you haven't. Are you lying to yourself or us? And they're like, doesn't it start with a 3? So it's like 34 years, 34 years now. And it just seems like yesterday. It really does. It started,
Well, we're going to go through that journey, and we're going to unpack that a bit. So when I looked at your resume, there's a kind of period that you've consolidated, which is sort of early 90s, BHP, late 80s, early 90s, through to 2007. And there was a series of project management, some consultancy had thrown in there as well, but amazing organizations, right? So you have BHP, SMS Consulting, Anderson Consulting, ITRM, IAG. Then you pivot and you go to the public sector, sort of Department of Justice and Vic Gov. And through that kind of period of about 20 years through there, actually, there was all sorts of tenures from sort of 12 months to 4 years in roles. And so I'm just interested, that kind of formative period of your career, what was kind of going on at that stage?
So much change. Much change within business, more broadly. A wave of transformation, although that's not the language we used back then. But organisations were very, very keen to find an edge, and that edge manifested itself in very, very large change programs. I think about, I think what working at BHP gave me was the discipline of lean, understanding manufacturing, understanding how to read a balance sheet, understanding what drives a business, understanding how do you actually structure a team. So the fundamentals of what you do, I learnt at BHP. So the DNA effectively was laid, and I still today refer to my quality training 30 odd years ago because you know what? It's still relevant today. Lean manufacturing is the secret sauce, I still believe, in a lot of the work that we do today. But
well, and it's interesting because a lot of that was formative through probably the 70s and 80s in Japanese manufacturing, where the differentiator was we can make the product quicker and cheaper. It wasn't about innovation so much. I mean, that's a generalization, by the way, but it was speed, efficiency, quality, product. And it's really interesting to see how that transformed from manufacturing to technology, because that became a much more dominant force.
Absolutely.
So great place, great time for you to start your career.
Oh, it was.
With sort of BHP. What were the biggest challenges you were kind of through those first 20 years or so of kind of building your career?
Finding my voice.
Okay.
Women weren't necessarily the norm. And even today, quite often you'll be the only woman in, it's really sad and tragic, but it's not unusual to be the only woman in a leadership team. Yeah. Or in a meeting, or it just happens. It still happens today. That was a challenge. Not that we can't build professional relationships with men. Of course you do. Yeah. But again, back then, my husband and I have 2 children who are now they're adults, but the drivers of caring for your family, trying to be there, to be able to balance it, especially when the kids were quite young, were difficult, were very, very difficult. We were fortunate that my husband was able to, we could split it. But for me, there was never any concession anywhere I worked until I got into reasonably senior roles. Was there a consideration of you can't go out to that dinner, you can't do, none of that was even a consideration because the guys typically had partners who could accommodate that. Not, good on them. Nothing but admiration, but it was a different time.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
As you were talking about that, I was thinking about your description of your high school years of being the outsider. I don't think that was quite the word you used, but you were kind of used to that. Maybe that kind of your childhood set you up for going into tech as and being the only woman often in the room, not being uncomfortable by being that outsider and just leaning into it.
Oh, absolutely. And I am really comfortable in my own skin. It's a skill I've had to learn. So I'm an introvert by nature. You wouldn't know it when you meet me, by the way.
You wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know it, but INFJ for the curious. Yeah. And I am an absolute raging introvert.
Yeah, right.
But I would live in a world of people who aren't necessarily that. And you adapt. And I think adapting, getting comfortable with who you are, getting comfortable with your identity and forming opinions and all of that, I think, kind of comes together in this package as you age.
Look, I think you're right. I think it's the first thing when people come into the workplace is it's that kind of expectation versus reality. And that was my next question I was going to ask you is,
of course,
what kind of learning was going on through those first years? What were you learning about yourself? Or what was the biggest learning opportunity?
It was more survival, to be honest with you. It's like, balancing life, family demands, cultural demands, work demands. It was, back then, if you were to ask me how I would describe myself, I was a juggler.
Yeah.
So many balls in the air, and, hoping not to drop any of them was the key. But continuous learning. So throughout it all, I've fundamentally believed that education is the key. I really do. And it has been and continues to be, even at this stage in my career. I still firmly believe that you invest in yourself. And in my formative years, in amongst all of the various balls that were in the air, there was always one of those was always learning, growing,
Yep.
being curious.
I saw that. I've got it, I think, later in my notes, but I saw some of the different learning that you undertook, I think, through maybe Harvard Business School, from memory. I saw the Masters in Leadership as well. And again, I was interested to know what motivated you to go down that path.
Curiosity and understanding people. So leadership is a discipline that no one sits down and says, this is how to be a leader. Unless you're very, very lucky, it's not. People do business degrees and there might be an element of HR, there might be an element of some leadership theory thrown in. But typically, coming through the track of science that I did, it really wasn't.
Yeah.
And getting into more and more senior roles, what I found was that leadership became more and more important, where organisations start questioning values, start instilling their values, advocating for their values, judging people by values, whether perceived or real. And I got very, very curious about this, so I went and studied it.
Yeah, because we spoke about this earlier. So
we did.
So your study was around, if I remember correctly, it was the way that values translate into corporate performance.
Absolutely, and individuals' performance. Okay. So that values congruence of individual.
So what was your kind of takeaway from studying that area?
Very, very controversially. Strangely enough, corporate values don't necessarily translate. Our values, being an org psych yourself, this, our values are set before the age of 10.
Yeah.
So it makes it very, very challenging. Our behaviours adapt,
yes,
but our values are our values. Yeah. So I think organisations should have very rich mission, vision, their aspirations, their ambitions, the behaviours that they'll tolerate. But I think someone's values are their values.
Yeah, okay.
It's pretty hard to change, in my view.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. I think unless you go through some kind of significant life event, they're going to be pretty fixed. The other thing I'm always interested in with corporate values is, are they kind of descriptive of what the company is or what the company wants to be?
Exactly.
And I'm not sure most companies know that. And it's often my joke that it's quite alarming that many organisations have integrity as a value, and if that's aspirational, that's a real problem in my opinion.
It's so entertaining that when I see that, I'm like, oh. Yeah. And truth, I've seen truth. Yeah. It's like, so what does that mean?
The other one is fun. Like you will come to work and you will have fun. Like, that's a value. I'm not quite, to me, that's a byproduct of the environment being good and safe.
What do you create?
Exactly. What you create. So, yeah, interesting. Sorry, I'm going to go back to your career because we're going to end up on a different podcast series, and Haley's going to be furious. Was there a mindful plan through those early years to really define yourself as a specialist within sort of project management, program management, and change?
Not at all. It was all accidental.
It's all, right, okay.
No grand plan.
Yeah.
So for me, it was about solving problems. So what problems presented themselves? And I started to specialise in recovering things that were off the rails.
Yeah.
Which is how I actually came into Australia Post. There was the first time round. There was something that was off the rails. I was asked to come in and do some work, and stayed for 5 years, and then left and came back and stayed for another 4, as you do.
So is your problem solving kind of curiosity?
Curiosity led. Back then it was curiosity led. There's a little more discipline to to that now, thankfully.
I also noticed, obviously, through that time you had a couple of stints in consulting.
Yes.
How did that differ from being kind of client side, so to speak?
It's much easier being client side, can I say?
Is it? Why do you say that?
You see the output, the end result. See, I want to see so starting with the business need and the strategy, I want to be there for the end. I want to see the so what. Yeah. Whereas being on the consulting side, quite often you move from client to client to client based on what area you specialise in, and I want to see that full circle.
Yeah, okay. So you're a problem solver and a completer finisher.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a pretty rare skill set.
Absolutely. I want to see the end.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. That's interesting. So if you had the choice, you would clearly be more client side than on the consulting side of things.
Absolutely.
You also spent some time in the public sector. How did that kind of shape you?
I learnt so much I came in and worked with a gentleman called Lynn Thompson. I think he's probably long retired. And I learnt so much from him.
Yeah.
So much from him. I think if I look back, not to suggest that until I came into that role that I didn't learn from others, but it was a different type of learning. It's the first time that I truly saw political wrangling and manoeuvring and understanding how the machinery of government actually worked, how policy is formed. Those things first came into aware but not really involved. And for the first time, I actually got to see all of that play and the orchestration and how you actually orchestrate disparate groups with very, very disparate motivators.
Yeah.
And how do you actually get people to align? How do you create synergy where there is none to start with? So I owe all of that to him.
Yeah, fantastic. Did you, if you had your choice, private or public sector, where do you think you're private? What?
Every day of the week.
Yeah, why is that?
Faster decision making.
Yeah, okay.
So
you don't mind the wrangling in public sector, but the bureaucracy is probably just a bit too much.
It's too much.
Yeah.
Private sector usually.
Yeah, okay.
I may regret that one day.
I'm sure
but
not.
No, not at all. No.
Again, I think that's part of the early part of the career journey is kind of figuring out what's for you. You know, private or public, big corporate, startup. There's different environments, and I think it's very quick to go into a role or a skill type and then pursue that, but not think about the organisational setting. And I think that's such a major factor.
It is.
In fact, the job's probably the same broadly, different place. The company is the variable often.
Absolutely.
As we think about that then, so kind of as you made those roles, or you moved between those roles and those transitions, how much of that was you being proactive to look for those opportunities, and how much were you kind of being tapped on the shoulder?
A mixture. Typically, especially later in my career, I joined an organisation for a set purpose, and that purpose might be to mobilise and lead a transformation that the organisation needs. And I'll typically be there 3 or 4 years. We will complete that. I will have a break, usually, because it is all in. And then I'll look to what might be. Or I'll agree what my exit is and know where I'm going, but still have the break. So there is always a break.
Yeah.
If I've been working solidly on something big for 3 or 4 years, I'll take a couple of months, just regroup.
Yeah.
Usually knowing where I'm going, but.
And I think I talked about this on a previous show actually with a guest, and we're talking about the beauty of working in tech is you get those punctuation points, whereas maybe other careers are not quite the same way, particularly if you're working in projects or transformation. There is normally a kind of starting place and a finishing point, and you have the chance to maybe hop off, recharge,
exactly,
move to a different project, move to a different role, whatever it could be. In 2007, you joined OPOS, as you've kind of touched on a couple of times there as a program manager, and over the next 4 years, you then moved up to be into the exec team.
I did.
So first up, I guess, what drew you to OPOS?
As a business, I deeply respect what they do. What attracted me was their community, the connection to community, and a sense of purpose. This genuine desire for the organisation to serve, yet the need for them to be profitable and stand on their own 2 feet. And there was a tremendous opportunity to go in and be a part of that, part of something that's been around for back then well over 100 odd years. Something bigger than yourself.
And an organisation, no doubt, going through a huge amount of transformation with the digitalisation of the world as well.
Indeed.
Going from a very traditional model. And as you were saying that, actually, it was making me think many, many years ago, I did some work with the Royal Mail in the UK. And they had a really charismatic leader at the time that I was talking to, and he said, you know, the Royal Mail is an incredible institution in the sense that for the cost of a postage stamp of 25 pence or whatever it was back then, we make a commitment that we'll get that letter to next day anywhere in the UK.
It's pretty good.
He said there's probably no cheaper service for that kind of SLA anywhere in the world with any product with that kind of offering, but people take it for granted or they overlook the complexity of what we actually have to do for people. and I'd never really thought about it myself, but it resonates with what you're saying there about OPOS, that it really does have a core function within our society.
Absolutely. It's a business that is deeply entrenched in what it actually does for the community. Absolutely, it has to make money and wash its own hands, but it's there. And quite often you'll go into remote regions of the country and what's there is a pub and a post office, and not much else. And it's a staple. It's a connection point for the community to come together. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's a huge part of the community. Going off topic a little bit, they did something really cool in the UK, and when the London Olympics was on, and for every person that won a gold medal from the British team, obviously, they went to their local village where they grew up and they painted the postbox gold.
Oh, how lovely.
And all around the country, and they didn't tell anyone. So all of a sudden around the country, these gold mailboxes were starting to pop up. And it was just a really nice tribute to their home village. And I actually was in a village where there was one of the British cycling team that had won, and people would go and see it and get their picture taken. And I just thought it was the community, and it was the Mail and the Royal Mail, and they kind of really brought that back to home, similar to what you're saying there. So, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent.
No, not at all. It's good.
I read that when you went in there, it was to salvage a major infrastructure project, which it kind of seems to be your MO. You kind of go in when things are needing to be a bit recovered, or something's gone astray.
Back then, definitely.
And I think for some people that could be daunting, but I kind of sense that you love that challenge.
So much fun.
So what's going on when you're looking at those challenges? Kind of how are you processing that, and what excites you about it, I suppose?
Well, firstly, understanding what the organisation set out to do initially. Quite often in businesses, things they don't always appear as they seem.
Yep.
And what's deemed a failure may not necessarily be a failure, and there are many things at play. How a story is told, how value is measured, how success is measured is quite subjective.
Yep.
In very, very large transformation programs, because there are so many moving parts. It's difficult to actually get it to sit still long enough to understand it. So understanding what adventure the business first set upon, then understanding who the players are, what motivates them, and who's for or against what it is that you're doing. Understand the team that have been brought in, the no doubt countless management consulting firms and people who've been through and that had a few, and rebuilding, calling it, having the courage to say, this is what it is, the reality of whatever the state of being is. And it takes a bit for organisations to accept that, especially depending on what the backstory has been to that point.
Yep.
And taking it on only if you've actually got a mandate. There's no point taking on a piece of work that you don't have a mandate to address and that you don't have the runway to fix.
So the kind of theme I'm picking up there as you're talking is around alignment. And do you think that's where most projects go wrong? There's poor alignment around maybe expectations or people or...
All of those things.
All those things, yeah.
We speak a different language.
Yeah.
Where what's the typical and traditional tech, and there'll be lots of people who listen to this who will be talking about different methods of delivery. I'm completely agnostic. I think you do what you need to do to achieve the outcome. But it is about how you actually set on this path, what you say you're going to do, and being able to deliver it, and not say that don't make a commitment that you're not actually going to be able to honour. We start with requirements as a starting position, and what I've observed over the years is that people in operational roles in the business think that because they've given you or the BAs a list of requirements that you are going to religiously and diligently tick each of those off. The reality is that if that were the case, then you are lovingly, expensively recreating what you have today.
Yes.
And I think that is where the biggest disconnect with some of these things are.
Yep. Is
that you start with a very, very long list of thousands of requirements in large transformation, tech build transformations, and you end up you know, on a very, very firm path to hell, in my experience, with that. Because firstly, whoever sponsored the initiative has targets they need to achieve.
Yep.
And if you've lovingly systematised how they do things with a new system and built it, and they've got all the costs that come with that, yet none of the benefits, makes it really, really difficult.
So what's your secret to success?
Don't do that.
Yeah.
No, don't do that. Understand the organisation.
Yeah.
So in any new role, I first want to understand the business, understand what it is that works really, really well, and what needs to change. You know, what do people tell me needs to change, and what do I observe as needing to change, and making sure that there's really clear alignment with the CEO, with the board, on the adventure you're about to embark on. But the key to it all is understanding and alignment, and making sure that you don't come into an industry and although I have a propensity to work in logistics in the latter part of my career, but one company to another doesn't necessarily always relate. And what you think you know, chances are you've missed something. So every business is a blank sheet. Understand them. Understand what's made them successful. Because most businesses operate quite well without my help. So I'm not so vain to think that, you know, I need to suddenly come in and fix it.
But ultimately, there's a destination that they're trying to get to, and they do need help with that. And that's, I think that's probably the power of a good program leader is to understand that vision and help people to achieve it, accomplish it. You in that role, you did move from kind of what I would classify as program leadership to executive leadership, and I was interested in what shifts did you need to make to take that step?
So much.
Yeah.
So much. Suddenly I wasn't concerning myself with one thing, that when you're leading a program, you can have anywhere from 10 to 100 projects that sit within it, but it's still very, very contained.
Yeah.
And when you move out of that into an operational role, a business-facing role, suddenly the problems are far more varied. The team dynamics are varied, and adjusting to a different pace.
Yeah.
Not everything is as critically urgent as it is in a project context, because somehow we instinctively measure what a project costs, but we don't necessarily with the same diligence measure what we burn in a day in operations. Yes, we do when we review our budgets and so on, but typically it's not the intensity of a project. So just that a very, very different pace. First real exposure in a long time to corporate politics, which happens in projects, but not to that extent as it does in operational functions. The early years, there was a bit, but it settles down once you kind of grow into your leadership style and stance and start being impactful. Yeah. That quietens down a bit.
Yeah, great.
Hopefully, a little bit.
Were you glad you made the step?
I am. Yeah. I am. Look, I love the thrill of the chase of large-scale transformational programs, and sponsor quite a few of them. But I'm glad not to be doing them directly anymore.
So in 2011, you left OPOS and you joined Tabcorp. And I understand that you kind of went in and you headed up and built their PMO initially in that role.
Yes.
Is that right? I think.
Yeah. Yes, I did.
So I was interested in, why was that the right time to make the move?
We'd finished what we'd set out to do at Australia Post. It was time. Never overstaying my welcome is certainly one of my mantras. You come in, you do what you set out to do. And in my case, I'd had 4 or 5 different roles in a very, very short period of time. And the opportunity at Tabcorp, I wasn't necessarily looking, but I got a phone call from a search firm, and they said, you need to go and talk to this guy. I think it's really worth your while. And it was, I had the day off from work. I can't even remember why. And they said, he's available, he's about to travel, you need to go in. And I'm in jeans and sneakers, not too different to today, but back then. And I said, look, I'm not actually dressed for an interview. It's not an interview. Go have a coffee with him. So I went and met him. The guy was Andrew Walduck.
Yep.
And we then ended up working together for quite a number of years. And I joined his team not long after I joined his team, the demerger of our casino business. I still think about it as isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
The demerger of the casino business was announced, so I stood up the team and worked with some amazing people, some really, really amazing, interesting people. We partnered with some great firms at the time, and we separated the business, listed it on the stock exchange. Where do you get to just do that?
Yeah, that's right.
What an amazing industry tech is.
Yeah.
So that was a tremendous amount of fun. And of course, through the separation, the organisation reset itself into its target state. Andrew left and joined Australia Post.
Okay. So we'll get to that in a second. So,
Yes.
so that Andrew was the CIO?
He was one of 4 or 5 CIOs. Tabcorp had many back then.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
And I did read on your LinkedIn, I think it said reported to the group CIO for technology, or I think was the role. And I was curious, I was wondering, at that point, did you yourself have an eye on the role of a CIO in the future?
No, not then, no.
No. So when did
Not
that
at
come,
all.
When did that come on the radar?
Quite by accident, really.
Yeah, okay.
Quite by accident. It was never I'm going to tomorrow.
That was never your North Star?
No, not at all. Yeah. So up until, and even now, what makes me interested in a role and what I'm curious about is the challenges and the problems to solve, what drives the organisation, who they are. There are so many other factors than the role.
The actual role or the title is less relevant to the opportunity and challenge, let's say. Yeah.
That's far more interesting.
Yeah, great.
A title does not keep you interested in a role. It really doesn't. Yeah. It wears thin very quickly. So, but didn't set there.
One thing I did notice as I was looking through your resume is that at both AusPost and Tabcorp, you joined the business, and then very quickly, often within 12 months, you got promoted. And I was just interested, do you think that would be kind of the nature of the work in projects and programs that enable people to get those kind of quicker transitions compared to other careers?
I'm not sure.
Or is it just
I'm just really, really fortunate that those opportunities presented themselves to me. I mean, I join an organisation, typically form a leadership team, and we set about what we need to do relatively quickly. And what is it? The harder you work, the luckier you get. Yeah.
There's also there's some research that shows that if we're rewarded quickly when we put ourselves out there, we're more likely to put ourselves out there more often, I suppose. And I was looking at your career, and I was thinking you were rewarded quite brightly with those promotions. But do you think that encouraged you to keep being courageous through your career, to keep really pushing things?
Possibly. I honestly, up until now, had not thought about it, but it could well have. It wasn't the promotions or the next role were never the driver.
No.
They were quite accidental along the way.
Yeah.
I didn't have by the time I'm 30, I want to be this. By the time I'm 40, 50, and so on. Never that organised in my own thinking about my career. I have deep plans and ambitions for my leadership team, and I work with them on theirs, but I never quite thought about it that way about myself.
Yeah, okay. In some ways, that's good to hear, because I think it's reassuring for people to learn that you don't always have to have a master plan. You just do what you do it really well. You follow your curiosity, follow the best challenges, and good things are probably going to happen. It's that kind of serendipity to a certain degree. Quite
by accident, really.
I don't like the word luck, by the way. I had this discussion with someone recently in a podcast about I think if you attribute things to luck, you've got nothing you can replicate. So you have to be able to look at why you've been successful and be able to unpack that in order to be able to continue and for other people to learn from your experiences. It's just a pet thing. But look, I was going to ask you, after 18 months you returned to OPOS. I was going to ask you what lured you back. I think I've already got the answer. So it was Andrew that lured you back. So
don't tell him that, though. No, he knows it's all right.
It's out there now. You're too late.
Exactly.
The cat's out the bag. But what ways had OPOS changed in the 18 months you were away? Completely
changed. But I mean, it wasn't just that. Having worked, and I genuinely loved working at Australia Post. That's the truth. And what I realised was that Andrew was mobilising a formidable leadership team, and I wanted to be a part of the next chapter of the story of Australia Post with him. So
that was it. Sold.
That was it.
I had someone on the show recently, and they had left an organisation, gone somewhere else for about a year or so, and then returned. And again, hadn't left on a bad footing or anything like that. But they actually said when they came back, they felt that they had more credibility. They had maybe more a louder voice, or they were listened to the bit because they'd been somewhere else and then come back. That kind of came with a bit of extra gravitas. I was just curious. Is that something you experienced?
No, not at all.
Yeah, okay.
Not at all. Not for me, but people have different experiences. I was fortunate in that the work that I did previously was valued and appreciated and supported by our then CIO, Wayne. So I didn't feel that I wasn't being heard.
Yeah, okay. Look, I should probably be clear on that. They weren't necessarily feeling they weren't heard, but they felt they had so much more clout when they came back because they'd come back for a reason and had a different experience maybe. But it's just curious. I was because I'm interested in that. Whenever I talk with people over looking for jobs and careers and so forth, there's always this resistance. I don't want to go back somewhere.
I don't know why. You leave well. So my view is you work really hard while you're there. But as I'm leaving an organisation, you double down the handover prep. I almost feel like you need to do like a Q&A with some of my previous leadership team members because they've had the pleasure of having to do handover with me on handing functions and departments over. And there is quite a lot of diligence and preparation. Whether the people who we're handing over to appreciate it or it's irrelevant. It is just a way in which I operate. You leave cleanly. Yeah. You leave really, really cleanly, respectfully.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and it leaves the door open for the future to work with those people, to work in that organisation. But I think also going back to an organisation, you've got an advantage. You kind of know what it used to be like, or you've got an understanding of the spirit. So you kind of set up for success. But there's definitely a reluctance from many people to go backwards, is the perception. I think sometimes maybe that ego gets in the way of opportunities with people. I also saw in that time at OPOS, and it blew my mind when I read this. So it said I had a department, and I thought department's probably the wrong word, a small army of 450 people that were reporting into you. And I'm really interested, if you ever come across the concept they call Dunbar's Law. So Dunbar's Law is you can have a relationship with about 150 people, kind of from a human connection. So I'm just interested in how do you lead a team of 450 people if you kind of subscribe to a notion of a Dunbar's Law being kind of broadly accurate?
I can sit back and say I had met each of them at least for 15 minutes on their way in. So at Post, because of the nature of the work we were doing as we recruited, I would set in the early days a day aside where I would meet all our prospective. It wasn't an interview per se, it was just a cup of tea or a coffee and a hello. And in those I would learn about who they are, if they had kids, who their kids were, what their family origins were, what they were passionate about, what their football team, if they followed football. I'm the most unco person on the planet, by the way. But these are the sort of things I would look to understand. And from that, I would try and assess whether, having all the CV and all the other material the team provide, are they going to fit?
Yeah.
Are they actually on this journey with us? And my hit rate was pretty good. So, but no one joined that team that I had not met. And it wasn't control freakness. It really wasn't. And there was, but I genuinely wanted, because we were going to ask a lot of them. I felt like they should know what I believed in, what I wanted, what I was going to expect of them. And it didn't matter if they were a junior analyst, a BA, program director, program manager, or whatever they might be, head of function or capability. I met everyone.
Yeah, right. And so that was the final, almost
final
tick
step.
Before they got
final step.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And would you kind of use your observations to provide feedback to their direct manager in terms of?
It was their decision whether we hired them or not. Ultimately, but I would give them my thoughts.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was reading something, and I'm kicking myself now because I can't remember who it was, but it was a CEO of a pretty big organisation in the US. It did something very similar, but he'd actually take them for breakfast, and he'd mess up the breakfast order on purpose. Have you heard this before?
I have. It's so good.
He'd actually get the waiting staff to bring out the wrong food, or it was cold, or there was something wrong with it, to see how the person reacted. And how they kept their cool, whether they would challenge it, question it, whether they were polite, just to get a sense of the person's values.
Oh, absolutely. Like even today, when I'm interviewing, I will ask our front desk person and my EA, what were they like?
Yeah.
How do they interact with you? We've made decisions not to hire people. I've made decisions not to hire people on how they've interacted with those people.
Yeah, wow.
Because that's the true self.
Well, absolutely. That's right. It's not the version they're trying to project in an interview room to get the job. It's the person that's going to turn up at work every day.
And I've had it myself. I talk about hilarious scenarios at Australia Post in back in the early days. I was walking past the security desk and saw that there was someone there, and I knew someone was coming to see me for an interview, and I before I got a chance to introduce myself or anything, I just got the words hello. They ordered a coffee from me, and I thought, interesting, sure. And I went and got their coffee and said, what's your name? And said, I'm Ayten Ozenc, and if you grab your drink, we'll step into the meeting room for your interview now. But they were positively obnoxious in how they spoke to me, irrespective of, who I am, what I am. It doesn't actually matter. I'm
Absolutely
a person.
Right. Absolutely right.
Needless to say, I didn't hire them.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. Those things actually matter. As you know, this is
100%,
your world.
100% matters. As you were saying, that reminded me, I did some work again many years ago with Toyota, and we're talking about lean manufacturing and all this stuff. And I went to their facility in the north of England, and it was quite late on, and I was sitting in reception. There was no one around, and this I was meeting the head of manufacturing. Anyway, this guy came out wearing white overalls, and at first glance it looked like a cleaner or something. It was kind of at the end of the day, and he came over and introduced himself, and he was the head of engineering, and he said, "Oh, here everybody wears overalls. It's the same. It's the kind of Japanese way that we do things." But I remember in that moment, it would have been very easy not to have picked up the cue, because that's just human nature, isn't it?
Exactly.
People look around and they make assessments, but I think it's that equality of how we treat everyone that does make the difference.
Oh, absolutely.
So, God, I've lost my chain of thought. Actually, through that,
I've distracted you.
You have distracted me. You keep sending me off on these little memories, which is really, really nice, actually, because I forget about some of those experiences. And that's actually one of the nice things of doing this podcast is reflecting back on people I've met and things I've been in, and listening to people's stories. And it's, I guess we're some of the parts, right? Of what we've been through.
Absolutely, we are.
Through that period, the team was, you were very successful. The team was very successful, and I saw that you must have won. In fact, I was on your LinkedIn. It was like a dozen awards from everyone: IBM, SAP, AIPM, ITS. Like, if anyone had initials, like, you were winning an award from them, pretty much. What did that mean for you personally?
So, I personally have only won one award.
Yeah.
None of those are me.
These were team awards.
These are team awards, but not only my team. So, this is where it gets quite challenging, is that my team are at the pointy end, but beside my team sit our application teams that are led by other leaders, infrastructure team, architecture team, business engagement team. So it took a village to get Australia Post from a technology perspective, as the rest, there are thousands of people that work in the organisation, but tech at that time, it took an absolute village, and it started from the strategy and the culture that Andrew laid down in terms of how he wanted us to work as a leadership team, and we worked hard on how we teamed. So whatever came our way because of how that team worked.
Yeah, okay.
And the awards were team awards for the whole of tech, not just the project folk who delivered it. The SAP awards would have been for predominantly the application and architecture team. Delivery just kind of, there's a method, you follow it, not to undervalue what we do. But the complexity comes in some of those teams, and I think the secret to the success in those days at that time was that leadership team that I was a part of. So my team one was, I think, humming. We were a really, really strong, formidable team who believed in what we were doing, and we chased together. We didn't always get along, don't get me wrong. No. It's not suddenly we're all sitting by the campfire singing Kumbaya, because I'm sure if some of my former colleagues listen, Ayten, were you really there? But I like to reflect on things on the positive, not the negative. There are always trials and tribulations, but what was achieved then in such a short period of time was phenomenal.
Yeah, so, and I think you when you're part of a really high-performing team, you know it. You can feel the energy, you can feel the vibe and the accomplishment, and I think the awards and so forth are normally, again, the byproduct of what's really going on, rather than the ambition to go and win those awards in the first place. Look, that must have been an incredibly exhausting as well, mentally exhausting for yourself. And I did see that after 4 years there, you left and you took a sabbatical for almost 12 months.
I did.
So what did you get up to in that time?
There's a formula.
Okay.
There's usually some form of study, travel. So there's family travel, then there's travel with my girlfriends, which we still do to this day. There's time with family, going back home, spending time back home in Turkey, reconnecting. Like the last one I did, I visited my cousin who lives in central Anatolia, and they have this amazing farm. And the process I went through for my current role was actually on my iPad. They have high-speed, better internet in the villages in Turkey than some parts of Australia, to be honest. But I did my interview for my current role. Yeah, that process was run while I was sitting in poppy fields, which was on an iPad. Yeah, so amazing. It's an opportunity to recharge, but that's typically what I do. Yeah. I don't work. I just take time out.
It's great to hear that you've got a formula, because I often hear people, they'll say, I'm going to take a sabbatical. And they're doing it because they know that they're burnt out, they're depleted. But then they kind of get into this sabbatical and they don't necessarily know what they're going to do with their time. And then they start worrying about, should I be looking for a job, or when do I look for a job? And actually, it probably destroys the concept, because you're kind of worrying about... It would
stress you. It would. It would stress me. Sorry, I should say. It would stress me.
I think it is for most people. Yeah. That's kind of what I kind of sense. And I hear this often, particularly from execs. I've got an opportunity here to take a 6-month career break. Or they overplan, or they have way too high expectations of what they're going to do. So it was interesting to hear that you've got a formula. And I dare say you may get a few people reach out to ask for a copy of that formula. And I think that's where we should be supporting each other. And I think that's where people can get great advice from one another, because I think it's great to do, but do it properly. Otherwise, I think it loses the impact.
Well, I think you go with excellence, or you don't go with things like that. If you're going to do it well. Yeah. I really do.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, personally, for things like that, for work, I actually think progress over perfection. But if you're going to take a sabbatical, actually take one.
Yes, that's right. In February 2015, just prior to that sabbatical, around that kind of time, I saw that you joined Vic ICT for Women, which you're still part of that today. You're actually our third guest in the last 4 guests that have been part of that organisation. It's a bit of a theme. So what inspired you to get involved?
Our chair, Chris Skipper Conway, invited me to speak at one of Vic ICT back then. We've had a recent name change. We're Women for STEM now.
Yeah.
What's interesting is people don't know what ICT is anymore.
Yeah, right.
I think we're just old
Yeah, I think
now.
so.
But I was a keynote speaker at one of their events and loved their passion, loved what they stood for, and was invited to get involved. And getting involved was an opportunity to join their board. And over the years, I've been vice chair now for about 6 or 7 years. I champion for Go Girl, Go for IT. And, before we started, I was telling you about how joyful. My favourite day of the year is Go Girl Day, where we're at Deakin University. And kids come up to the Vic. It's a career expo for kids, but amongst many other learning opportunities. But kids come up to you and talk to you about their hopes, dreams, what they're curious about, and it is just absolutely joyful. It feeds your soul. Those days.
So that's a full circle moment, right? Because you were talking earlier about Year 8 maths teacher. And I'm not sure if this is where you were kind of going to come back to this, but the people in our lives at that age are so important, and the inspiration. And I've kind of got this idea in my head that I think young people are so impacted and conditioned by what they see in media on television, and they kind of think those are the careers, or that's what I should do, and they're so really ill-informed with true role models. So maybe talk a bit about that.
Absolutely. Look, we, for our oldest son, we went to the interview with we were at the final interview with the principal for his high school, and my husband and I went into the principal's office with our son, and the principal gets up and recognises me from Year 8. There is my Year 8 maths teacher, the principal of the school.
So that's your full circle. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And
you hadn't made that connection?
No idea at all. I hadn't looked. God only knows. We probably had his name and his details, and it would have been in a calendar invite, but I would have been scrambling, running from one thing to another, which is what I usually am doing. Yeah. But we get there, and there he is, and it was...
So clearly you were memorable.
I look different to all other kids in his class. I think that, but it was just so incredible. Remarkable to see him, to talk to him, to connect. It was just beautiful, and he was. And I shared with him just the impact that he'd had on my life, and it was really. I was
going to ask that if you shared that story.
Oh, absolutely.
How did he respond to that?
Oh, very emotionally.
Yeah.
It was good. It was really good to reconnect. Needless to say, our son did really well, and he's a grown man with a daughter now himself. Yeah,
but that's incredible. What the chances of that, and for that to have come full circle, and to have been such a pivotal figure at that point in your life as well. And is that kind of what you hope to give back through now Women in STEM?
I do. Even if it's a little. Where it's easier. I remember days coming up through tech where studying technology, where we would solder computer components. Things like that just don't happen to that extent anymore. But the safety equipment, simple thing, safety equipment that you wear to solder computer equipment. I'm very, I'm not very tall. I'm 5'3", so... the equipment is not necessarily made for... Firstly, it's not made for women, was back then, and it's certainly not made for such short people. So you're wearing safety gloves that are up here. The visor is kind of hanging over you, and you're trying to solder these delicate components.
Yeah.
No one should have to do that.
No, absolutely.
So I think part of my role and having a voice, having an opportunity to influence, whether it's education, industry, creating opportunities in awareness for the kids, their parents, their teachers. I think it's just an obligation. It's a need to want, not an obligation, but something I genuinely want to do. I choose to invest my time there. I could invest it anywhere, but I choose that because it's where I think my voice can help.
Yeah. And you're that role model, right? You've been there, you've done it, you've achieved it as well. To be able to
burn my fingers. Yes, along the way.
Yeah. It's interesting as you were talking about that with the soldering equipment. It makes me think about International Women's Day from last year. And it was much more about equity. And I think that was a concept that many people were less familiar with.
It's not interesting.
You kind of hear equality and diversity, but not equity. And I remember seeing this image, and it was the different bicycles. Have you seen this image? And kind of explaining that there's different bicycles for different people, and it's about creating equity in the workplace is what creates or supports diversity and people to be able to come forward. Again, slight tangent, but I was the success of the women's soccer team in Australia with Sam Kerr and is amazing. It's so inspirational. But I was reading an article, and it was talking about how a lot of these young girls were growing up wearing boys' soccer boots. And it was actually causing them a lot of injuries because they weren't structurally designed and appropriate for young girls to be wearing. But the market now for women's soccer boots is enormous. And I think the Nike CEO for Australia was saying that young girls coming into Foot Locker and JD Sports and so forth and asking for Sam Kerr's boots.
How good is that?
Whereas that just didn't exist 10 years ago. They were coming in and it was still Ronaldo or Messi or whatever. But that's equity again, isn't it? Right? It's the right tools for the job to enable people to be the best version of themselves, to live out the maximum opportunity for their potential, I think is... So it's extrapolation from your soldering equipment, but it's the same.
It's the same.
It's the same.
Absolutely, the premise is the same.
Okay, let's get back on the career wagon. So you then returned to Toll Group after a career break. So what drew you back to Toll at that point?
They were embarking on a really big transformation, and I've been in a very fortunate position where usually there's a couple of things to choose from, and the process runs concurrently. Yeah. And for me, it's about the people that I'm going to be working with, the commitment of the organisation, and the likelihood of success. Do I actually think I can do it? Not that I start a job with doubts per se, but is it actually achievable in the broader context of the organisation's ambitions and what they're prepared to put in terms of the broader executive's effort. Yeah. So all of those things kind of need to line up.
And did it kind of build on the work you've done with OPOS? I'm assuming there has to have been a kind of
it built on that. And it was similar but different. Global company operating out of 50-something different countries. We built capability and our own technology centre captive in Pune in India, leading a globally distributed team out of 4 global hubs. Yeah, right. And we built all that from the ground up.
Yeah, okay. So
the challenge again, it was a really, really interesting challenge. And the change that organisation went through and its transformation is reported by different people and different lenses that they look at life through. Yeah. And everyone has their own motivations for that. But I look at what was achieved, $400+ million, 10 transformation programs delivered. And if I had my way, there's only probably one that I think we shouldn't have started when we did, just later. Other than that, we delivered what we set out to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. Was that the first time you'd been in a role that had a kind of global exposure?
To this extent, yes. To this extent. It was, I'd worked previously for global organisations, but directly actually going out, building a technology team in that did engineering out of India for us specifically, recruiting that team ourselves. We could have gone and partnered. We partnered with Infosys for a very short period of time, but we were determined that we would set our own up. So doing that, setting the team up in Singapore, in New Jersey, of all places, where the business is, I guess. So
Yeah.
all of that was new, setting up the teams.
So what did you learn from that experience?
The value of surprise visits.
Right. Okay.
No. And I would travel often, but what I learned was fundamentally we're all the same. People want to get up in the morning and they're motivated to do good work and provide for their families. Finding a common language in amongst all of the various groups, and there were hundreds of people. Quite possible overall with the consultants, probably thousands that worked on that transformation with us. But our goals were reasonably clear.
Yeah.
But resilience, the importance of resilience, the importance of keeping your energy stores and the team's energy stores up, because it was relentless. The work was relentless.
It's a huge
transformation. Absolutely, And we, when I joined the organisation, they had already been acquired. So we're a Japanese company, fundamentally, learning a different culture of business. I did this amazing course through Melbourne Uni's Asia Link on, how to do business within Japanese culture. And I think, honestly, part of my ability to build relationships with my colleagues from the parent organisation, its genesis is there. Because I knew, other than how do you hold a business card and what you do, I knew very ignorant about Japanese culture in terms of business. And all of that came from, I need to understand this because we need to be able to communicate more fully. And it was really good.
So that's interesting. There's a consistent theme here, isn't there? You talked about going into OPOS and deeply understanding the essence of the organisation in order to be successful. And again, what I'm hearing there is having a Japanese owner is deeply understanding the way that you're going to be successful and the way that things need to be done as well. I think that seems to be very much at the essence, and maybe that's part of your character around problem solving. You need to understand things, and maybe that working in an organisation is much about problem solving. Problem is probably the wrong word for it, but
it is.
You're making sense of the rules or how you're going to solve the problem and the kind of riddle that you've got. Sorry, I made a mistake. I said that you went back to Toll, but you've never been at Toll before.
No, first time, but it doesn't matter.
But you did go back to Tabcorp after that, and that's what I meant. So that was after about 4 years, and you went in as CIO
for the wagering
in the media, media business. How did you know you were ready for that CIO role?
My group CIO and I had worked together at Toll.
Okay, right, of course.
But I was actually not heading to Tabcorp that time. For all intents and purposes, I was actually going to a financial services organisation as their chief transformation officer. Yeah. And at the 11th hour changed and went. It's a sliding door moment, I guess. So I ended up going. And very soon thereafter, there was, the merger was happening, but soon thereafter there was the demerger, the separation again. So that seems to be my what happens when I join. No, not at all. The board actually make the decisions, and it's whatever they decide the organisation follows. But I had a lot of fun. It was hard work. It was. Was it a different organisation to the one that I had left, over 10 years ago? Absolutely. Very different organisation. Very different marketplace, though.
It was also an interesting time that it was at the end of 2020, I believe. So we were coming to the end of the first year of COVID.
It was tough.
We were still kind of like hokey pokey in and out of lockdowns, and no one knew if we were coming or going and what kind of work looked like. So again, I was interested, how did you kind of onboard yourself into a role when there was all this ambiguity as well, kind of going and uncertainty in the world?
It was difficult, to be honest. It was. Getting to know people, not being able to actually travel. The team was split between Melbourne and Sydney. My digital team were predominantly Sydney-based. So it was a lot harder during COVID, but I'm just very lucky compared to a lot of people. So I can't really complain. So lots of challenges that the ease of being together usually does away with. But we made it work.
Yeah. When you left Tabcorp, you joined where you are now, ABN Group. A different sector again for you, I think.
Very different sector.
So I'm just interested in how that is a different sector is, what you're learning from that, or what's kind of challenging you. Yeah. So much.
First time working for a private business.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. That's got its benefits.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's lovely. Like being very, very close to how the organisation actually operates, being a part of the exec that has the privilege to lead such a successful business and to help continue that success is an absolute privilege. It sounds so wishy-washy, but it really is, that people actually trust you to come into something that they've built. So it's their baby and you're coming in and helping them run it.
Look, I've been a part of small businesses, big businesses, listed businesses, and I've been a part of a big business that listed. And I kind of felt that post-listing, suddenly a lot of the conversation was about the investors or the market, or what are we telling the external world. Whereas I think pre that moment, the focus was always about customers and people that worked in the business, and there was a shift. Look, I think that business is now probably getting back to what it was very strong at its core at that time. But there's a very different dynamic in terms of what drives and I think the feeling of working in different type of organisations going through those things.
But I'm so fortunate that, with me on the journey that I'm on right now is most of my leadership team from my last 3 or 4 roles. They're here.
So we talked about that. We talked about before we were on camera or off camera. Yes. But the importance of taking the crew with you for success.
Look, I actually think that is the secret sauce. And it's not always the whole team, because, people have lives and commitments, and not everyone wants to up and change when I do. But by and large, there are members of my team who I've been working with for 18 years. We've been together. I don't think I've run a major transformation without him being there.
Yeah.
We've just been together. I've watched his family grow. The kids were babies. But again, my transformation GM, he and I have been together since I first worked at Australia Post all those years ago. And can't imagine not being together, not doing this together.
The data supports it, that teams deliver outcomes, not individuals. And you can take someone out of an environment, put them somewhere else. If they're with the wrong team, they're not going to be successful. It's all about culture, team, trust, respect, understanding each other's strengths, weaknesses. That comes from hard yards of being around the block a few times together.
Oh, absolutely. But what I find is that where we add new members to the team, and we've just added our CISO, he's like 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a month in, but how quickly they adapt, because there is a certain way in which we work, there's a rhythm to the team, and they kind of look out for each other and we solve together. It's a very unique dynamic, and a very privileged dynamic that I get to enjoy, because these people trust me with their careers and for some crazy reason keep following. So I think I'm not complaining.
There's another factor as well. You have to be able to assimilate new people into that group. Otherwise you get groupthink.
Oh, absolutely.
And we see that. We see the degradation of performance in teams that stick together too long. Doesn't matter if it's in business, in sport. You have to be able to bring in new ideas, but around a core ethos. So it's a balance. Keep the band together, but be able to bring in, a new percussionist from time to time to augment what you're doing. Look, great. I'm going to ask you some more broader career questions now. And I feel you're going to struggle with some of these because you're very humble. So I'm going to ask you to not be as humble as you would normally be. But what are you most proud of in your career?
The Indigenous internship program that Australia Post are a part of. career trackers. It started with a conversation in my leadership team where I realised that we were slightly monoculture-ish in the broader team, and said, what are we actually doing? How are we connecting with Indigenous youth? How does our grad program connect with it? So I gave them a challenge. I didn't have the answer. More often than not, I actually don't have the answer and I don't come up with the answer. Don't tell them that though. And one of the team came across career trackers, the organisation, and we reached out and connected with them, and we started sponsoring. And we were late to the dance with career trackers. Companies like Qantas and others, some of the big construction companies were already there. We were very late to the dance. But the first year we took one intern, offered him a grad role, and successively each year different disciplines were brought on board, finance, HR and so on. But it started with a conversation of, I just thought, how are we actually feeding this pipe?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting because it's something that we talk about a lot within our business and with our clients, particularly about Indigenous communities. And from the research that I was undertaking, what I could find is that there was about 1,000 people in Australia that identify as Indigenous that work in technology. Of 750,000 people in technology, we're talking about a very, very, very small minority. And in Victoria, if my research is right, it's under 100 people.
Wow.
It's a really niche talent pool. But how are we growing that? And,
exactly.
And I think that is something, I look at organisations like the Tech Council Australia, and I'd love to see more drive around that, because they're trying to grow the sector. But how are we growing that for everyone?
Exactly.
And opening those opportunities. So I didn't realise that was something that OPOS did, or
I'm hoping they still do, but that I think is a standout. I mean, the work and the thousands of people who do the work that I've been involved in, I'm very grateful for and very proud of. But personally, when I think about, I talk about rocking chair moments with my leadership team. Like when all is said and done and we sit back and we are drinking really good red wine, that's the precursor to the rocking chair. We think about what are the memories that we've bottled that we'll reflect on in our career. And I remember the first gala dinner for career trackers that we went to. Our table was full of, middle-aged men and a couple of women, and there wasn't a dry eye around the table as the kids come up and tell their story, the distances they've travelled, the sacrifices their families have made for them to be there.
Yeah.
To be able to go to university, have an education, have a promise of a tomorrow. I just think it's such an important voice for them to have, an opportunity for them to have, and for the sake of an internship, the cost of an internship, you have an opportunity to impact. So I hope they still do it. I don't know, but it was really good.
We'll find out. Do you have any career regrets?
No, I don't really believe in them, because there's a learning in it. Even the really bad decisions, and I've made quite a few of those along the way, but I've learnt from them. At the time, I may not think that, but with the benefit of time, as I reflect, I learnt from it. I was meant to experience whatever it is that I've experienced. Yeah. And I learned not to do it again.
So I'm going to reframe that question.
Okay, then.
Because I think we tend to regret the things we don't do as opposed to the things that we did do. So is there anything that you haven't done in your career that you regret not doing?
No. I started it's an accidental career from the start. Yeah. So therefore, everything is a bonus.
Yeah, I love that.
It is. It really is. So no.
Is there anything left on the career bucket list?
You
said you never have a plan. You have a plan for everyone else, but not yourself.
Not for myself. No. I probably have, depending on how long this journey lasts, I probably have somewhere between, although, again, don't tell my husband, I often say to him, 5 more years, and we have this 5 more years conversation. But I think somewhere between 5 to 7 years, and then I'm done. So there is either this role or this plus one other role, and that's it, I think. Then I get to hang out with my grandchildren.
That rocking chair.
That rocking chair, bottle of wine, play with the babies.
Yeah, great.
That's it.
Throughout our career, we're shaped by the feedback we receive. What's the most significant feedback you've received?
Goodness. Rich feedback over the years. But one that has stuck with me that I am still to this day very, very cognizant of is my blind spot for my people. Is one of my previous leaders said, they are not as perfect as you seem to think, and you need to open your eyes and see people for what they are, who they are, what their gaps are, and do something about it. And he's right. Especially when you care for people and you have genuine love and affection for the team that you're with, not romantic love, but you care for people. And I think you need to, as a leader, I think it's pretty hard to lead without caring for people. But that threw me to the point where we didn't speak to each other for a couple of weeks. Yeah. My boss, gave him rich feedback back. And now, grudgingly, he was, all these years later and throughout, he was right.
It's tough feedback to take, isn't it? Because seeing the good in people is a good trait to a point.
Till it gets in the way.
That's my takeaway. That's kind of what the feedback was.
Oh, it was. It was. And he was right. He will laugh if he listens to this.
Yeah. We'll tag him. We'll tag him in the post. I'm looking for Hayley here. We'll tag him. Mm-hmm. So last question.
Sure.
If you had a singular piece of sage advice that you wanted to give to the next generation, what would it be?
Oh my goodness, that's hard. That is hard. Only because I don't offer advice. Having raised two boys, my advice is not always welcome. Oh, Mum, that's so old.
Yeah.
But be true to who you are. Like, what is it that makes you happy? Find your happy place and be true to that. Yeah. There are accidental careers waiting for everyone. Once you find what you enjoy and you do it, I think the rest becomes easy. I don't know that it's one sage advice though, sorry.
That's good. That's all right. I didn't expect one answer, by the way.
Okay.
I did say last question, but I've got one more question, which is not really related to career and so forth. You're passionate about learning. You're a lifelong, you can tell that from your curious mind, and you want to keep developing and growing. Where do you go these days to look? What podcasts are you listening to? What books are you reading that's inspiring you?
Let me just have a quick look. There are so many. So I do love reading physical books. It is, but I listen to books I've read or am reading in the car because I don't like wasting travel time. Either I'm speaking to someone or I'm listening to someone speak at me. And I'm doing a lot of team dynamic work at the moment. So book I'm listening to and reading, Silos, Politics and Turf Wars.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I have them. It's to plan against them. Just
that's Patrick
Lencioni. Love his work.
I love his book, The Advantage. That blew my mind when I read that. It was one of those I couldn't always get through a chapter without coming up with a dozen ideas and thoughts and driving probably my leadership team mad as well.
I do that. So when I join an organisation, typically people walk around with copies of Good to Great. So I love Jim Collins and his work, and especially given the nature of the work that I do, I don't come into an organisation and say, this is not good. Clearly the business is operating, it's profitable, but where they want to go is actually to be better than where they are. So typically there'll be quite a few copies of books.
I love that. When we finished here, I'm actually heading straight to Dimmocks to buy 2 copies of that book to give to 2 people, I've promised, because I'm going on leave tomorrow. So we can talk about it when I'm back. But it's a great book.
It is. It really is. But then it level sets people. They're less defensive. But
it's also a book because it's steeped in data and research. it's not these kind of flippant ideas that someone's popped out. They've gone away as a research team. They've really got to understand. I think it's really interesting. There's this very similar book I read last year, McKinsey.
The CEO Excellence. Yeah.
It reminded me of a very similar book, concept, in terms of the depth they went into. And again, the same thing.
It's good.
That's just covered in notes, that book.
It is really good. Oh, I'll have to come back to you with the name, but Hubert Joly, who was one of the guest professors at Harvard, he was the CEO and then chair of Best Buy, and he drove the transformation and recovery of Best Buy. But his book, which escapes, it's in my office, but I just can't remember, is really, really good. His lectures were fantastic, but really, really good. If you get an opportunity to read,
check that out,
it was really good. Podcasts, Boss Class, The Economist. Very, very tedious and boring things that I like. Work Life.
Adam Grant, classic.
Adam Grant, bit of optimism. Simon Sinek, quite entertaining. Esther Perel, Housework. They're the ones that are on my...
Do you only listen to podcasts in the car? Would you listen to them other times?
If I'm walking alone to clear my head, I will typically listen, or on the car, or I'll download them. I'm in Perth every second week for work. So the way my mind works, I reward myself with doing things for myself. So listening to a podcast, reading a book, those sort of things. On one way over to Perth, it's work. On the either end of the trip, I will listen or read or do something.
Great. That's a good 4-hour flight.
It's a good 4-hour flight, so I can get through a pretty good book in that, if I'm reading a physical book in that time.
It blew my mind when I moved to Australia. My wife and I flew to Perth. And I was like, it's 4 hours and we're still over land. Like if I was flying from London, I'd be in Turkey or I'd be in Greece by now. This is bonkers. How am I still in the same country?
It's like that.
It's a good trip.
Oh, it is, absolutely. It is.
Look, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time and your stories and experience. And I know a heap of people are going to learn so much from this, everything you've shared today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Emmbr, that's EMMBR LinkedIn page for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.